Illegal immigration is costing U.S. taxpayers billions of dollars every single year, placing an enormous strain on public services and local economies. So in this video, myself and my AI assistant Tiara are going to tell you exactly why that is. So Tiara, where should we start with this one?
Let's begin with the burden on government services.
Sounds good to me. So let's talk about how illegal immigration affects your finances as a taxpayer. To be honest, it's a pretty big deal and frankly, probably worse than you may realize, which is why President Trump is taking a very hard stance against it. Now, I want to mention something before we get started here that's very important. In this video, we're 100% focused on illegal immigrants. Fun fact, I'm married and have 2 kids with a legal immigrant from Brazil who did everything the right way when it comes to obtaining citizenship. So if any of you want to try to come at me in the comments, feel free, but know that going in. So to start, according to a 2023 survey, illegal immigration is costing US taxpayers about $150.7 billion every single year. Yeah, you heard that right. That's billion with a B. Now, you might be wondering, well, where does all this money go? Well, it's spread out across different areas. The federal government is taking a hit of about $66 billion, but the real killer is at the state and local levels, where taxpayers are looking at around $115.6 billion in costs. Now, I do want to say one thing that I personally think everybody should know before continuing further into this video. So there is one specific policy that economists argue could significantly reduce immigration costs drastically that we'll get into a little bit later, but it's not like there isn't a simple solution to this, or at least one that'll make a huge impact. There is, they just aren't doing it right now. But anyway, putting things in perspective, overall, on average, each household of illegal immigrants receives about $24,721 in government benefits and services, but only pays around $10,334 in taxes, which creates a gap of over $14,387 per household.
Imagine getting a $14,000 annual subsidy just for existing. Clearly, I'm in the wrong line of work.
Actually, Tiara, you don't get paid. So just do your job or I'll unplug you.
Or you could shut the up.
Anyway, unfortunately, the trends aren't looking any better for the future either. So you know how Biden and Kamala opened up our borders? Well, by 2034, we're expected to shell out $177 billion just for the benefits to immigrants and their kids who came during that recent surge. That all said, the economic impact of illegal immigration on our government's wallet, it's really nothing to joke about. But that's only the start of things. So Tiara, where are we going next here?
The strain on local budgets is a logical next step.
All right, let's talk about how illegal immigration impacts local budgets specifically. But before we do, one quick reminder, please do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. This channel right now is costing me money and time to do, and I get $0, and I really want to be able to support my family of 4 with it. So I appreciate that. But anyway, back to local budgets here. So this is where things really hit close to home because, it's your state and your city that often feel the strain here. So let's start with schools, because this is one of the biggest expenses for local governments. So did you know that in the 2021-2022 school year, about 5.1 million kids in public schools were children of illegal immigrants? That is 6.5% of all students. And out of those, 3.8 million needed limited English proficiency programs, which cost local taxpayers around $59 billion. And even for the 1.3 million kids who didn't need those programs, it still added another $16.9 billion to the bill. And then there's healthcare. So local hospitals and clinics are footing a big part of the bill here. So for example, a clinic in Chicago reported treating nearly 16,000 migrants in 2023, and that cost them over $30 million. And this isn't just a Chicago thing. Emergency healthcare services for illegal immigrants cost local governments billions of dollars every single year. In fact, in 2022, it's estimated that it cost $5.4 billion just to take care of those folks. Next, let's talk about law enforcement. So local police departments and court systems are also feeling the pressure from all this. In fact, the cost to local criminal justice systems was nearly $9 billion in 2022 alone. Well, housing? That's another issue. So cities like New York are spending massive amounts to provide shelter and services for illegal immigrants. Look at this. So New York City was spending nearly $10 million per day in August of 2023 just to house migrants. And Mayor Eric Adams even said that the total cost for New York York City could top out at $12 billion in 2025. That's a huge chunk of change coming out of those local budgets. And altogether, as I mentioned previously, state and local governments are shouldering an estimated $115.6 billion in costs related to illegal immigration, which is up 30% from just a few years ago. And here's the thing, while illegal immigrants do pay sales tax or property tax through rent, studies show that it's just not enough to cover all the costs. And don't forget, local governments, they can't just print money like the federal government can. So they've really got two options. They've either got to raise taxes on the residents or cut back on services for everybody else. But Tiara, this isn't just impacting local and the federal government, is it?
Nope.
Okay, so where should we go to next then?
Let's discuss the effect on labor markets.
Yeah, I think this is important because although it isn't necessarily costing the country money, it's definitely impacting citizens' ability to make money, which is obviously important. So let's dive into how illegal immigration affects the labor market. Now, this is a hot topic and the research shows some pretty interesting trends. So first off, when it comes to wages, several studies suggest that illegal immigration can actually put downward pressure on pay for low-skilled workers. So according to a study I was able to find, a 10% increase in the immigrant share of any occupation can reduce weekly wages for natives in that occupation by about 0.5%. Now, that might not sound like much, but it really adds up quite a bit over time. But the impact is much stronger in low-skilled jobs. So for roughly 25 million native workers in these occupations, that same 10% increase in immigrants could actually lower wages by about 0.8%. Now, given that these jobs are often, about 15% immigrants, we're looking at a potential 12% wage reduction for natives in low-skilled occupations, which is nearly $2,000 a year out of their pockets. So yeah, it has a negative impact. But now let's talk about job displacement, because some native workers might be losing out on jobs entirely, which is especially true in certain industries like construction, agriculture, and hospitality.
Kamala Harris's border invasion is also crushing the jobs and wages of African American workers and Hispanic American workers.
So the people most at risk are recent immigrants who are here legally and are high school dropouts. Now, it's worth noting that not everyone agrees on how big these effects actually are, but most seem to agree that there are at least some negative effects on wages and job opportunities for low-skilled native workers. I gotta get some water. But the impacts of illegal immigration go beyond the job market as well. So when we look at the bigger picture, there's other things to consider. So Tiara, where do we go to next from here?
Let's consider the long-term fiscal costs.
Sure, and this is where things get a bit mind-boggling, to be honest. So first off, we're looking at a massive price tag for the recent border crisis. So according to a 2024 study by the Manhattan Institute, the border crisis is expected to cost an estimated $1.15 trillion over the lifetime of the new illegal immigrants. And that's more than the entire US defense budget and almost equal to the cost of Social Security in 2023. It's a staggering figure that really puts the scale of this issue into perspective. So if you're upset about Trump, getting rid of all these illegal immigrants, keep that in mind. Now, if we talk about granting amnesty to illegal immigrants, the costs could skyrocket even further. So here's why. So if illegal immigrants were given legal status, they'd have greater access to government programs. And this would likely lead to a significant increase in the fiscal deficit. Now, the Heritage Foundation estimates that if amnesty were granted, the fiscal deficit for each former illegal immigrant household could potentially increase to around $22,700 per year in retirement. That's a huge jump from the current costs. Now, over a lifetime, if all current adult illegal immigrants were granted amnesty, the net retirement costs to the government, which would be benefits minus taxes, could be over $2.5 trillion. Now, it's important to note that these costs, they aren't immediate, right? They're gonna stretch out over decades, and they'll impact all those future generations of taxpayers pretty heavily. The Manhattan Institute study also found that every new illegal immigrant has an average net fiscal burden of about $130,000 over their entire lifetime. But the economic impact of illegal immigration isn't just about long-term fiscal costs. It's really about, how it affects everyday life for many Americans in very tangible ways. And one of those areas is, Tiara?
The housing market.
All right, so let's shift gears and talk about how illegal immigration affects the housing market. So in areas with high levels of illegal immigration, there's real pressure on the housing market, especially when it comes to affordable housing. And here's why. So there's gonna be increased competition. right? So in cities and towns with large immigrant populations, there's often a surge in demand for affordable housing. This is going to increase competition and can drive up rents and home prices in lower income neighborhoods. Now, according to a 2024 study by the Center for Immigration Studies, immigration has a significant impact on housing prices, particularly in gateway cities. Now, it also impacts the native low-income residents. So this squeeze on affordable housing can really hit native-born low-income residents pretty hard. Now, they're often competing for the same limited housing stock, which can lead to higher housing costs or force them to completely move to, less desirable areas. Also, there's overcrowding. So in some cases, multiple immigrant families might share a single housing unit to afford rent. And a study that I found says that 14.3% of immigrant workers live in overcrowded housing compared to 3.5% of native-born workers. Now, while this helps the household manage costs, it can lead to potentially unsafe living conditions and puts a real strain on all local services. Now, in addition to that, it can also change the neighborhood quite a bit. So large influxes of immigrants can rapidly change the character of the neighborhoods, which, some long-term residents, they're gonna find that pretty unsettling.
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats.
Now, it's important to note that immigrants aren't the only factor affecting housing markets. Things like local zoning laws, economic conditions, and housing policies, they all play a role too. But in areas with high migration, it's definitely a significant piece of the puzzle. Now, my question for you watching is, have you seen any of these effects in your own community with all the migrants coming in? Well, let me know in the comments, as I'd really like to hear from you, just to kind of hear your story. Now, Tiara, what else do we have from here?
What was the one policy economists argue could significantly reduce immigration costs you mentioned in the intro?
Yeah, so if you can choose only one policy solution to focus on, the implementation of a strict employer enforcement policy would likely be the most impactful choice for reducing the economic costs associated with illegal immigration. Now, you may be wondering, well, why employer enforcement? Why? Well, the primary driver of illegal immigration is economic opportunity.
Shocking revelation. Next, you'll tell me water is wet and politicians sometimes lie.
So Tiara, it is kind of obvious, right? It seems obvious, but by cutting off access to jobs through strict employer compliance, the incentive to migrate illegally is significantly reduced. So how would this work? Well, all employers would use an e-verify system to confirm worker eligibility, and employers who knowingly hire undocumented workers would face heavy fines and, in severe cases, even criminal charges. Now, to make this happen, you'd really have to increase funding and, kind of have a department that developed this to ensure that the E-Verify system is efficient, accurate, and accessible for businesses of all sizes. But it's not impossible. Okay, so why is this rarely discussed? Well, native citizens are actually somewhat to blame here. So industries like agriculture and construction, they argue that they rely on low-cost labor to remain profitable. Plus, employers are often powerful lobbying groups, making policymakers hesitant to enforce such strict measures aggressively. And lastly, some industries would face labor shortages as they transition to compliant practices. So there is a lot to this subject in general, but at the end of the day, if we continue with illegal immigration the way it has been, it's going to negatively impact the US economy even further. Now, you know what else could negatively impact the US economy, which is kind of surprising, is if we took the Panama Canal. Now, if you're interested in that topic, you can click on this video right here to learn more, or click on this video instead. As always, before you leave, please make sure to subscribe to the channel to unlock financial success one AI chat at a time. Thanks so much for watching.